बिस्मिल्लाहिमिनश्शैतानिर्रजीम बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम अस्सलातु वस्सलामु अला मुहम्मदिन व आलिहि तय्यबीन अत्ताहिरीन रब्बि इश्रह ली सदरी व यस्सिर ली अमरी वाहलुल उक़्दतम मिन लिसानी यफ़क़हू क़ौली रब्बी ज़िदनी इल्मा. So, Assalamu alaikum everyone. Today, inshallah, our topic is parenting to raise children with discipline. And I do apologize. This was supposed to be a Facebook Live session last week at the parent drop-in that we do every month. And the technology did not cooperate. We could not get a good Wi-Fi signal. And so that although we did record it audio, we couldn't pass on the video. So here it is. And the three main topics that we will be talking about today are what are the differences between punishment and discipline. Many times we get confused. We think we may be doing one when we are actually doing the other. And we will talk about what is the impact of punishment and discipline, not only on our children, but also on ourselves as parents. And we will talk about raising children with discipline. So let's begin. Before we even start our topic, we do need to have a discussion about why do children misbehave. Sometimes I know when my children were young, and many parents, we think that they're doing it just to get, just to make our lives difficult. And we can have that experience as parents, but actually most of the time that is not the case. And some of the reasons why children misbehave, just think about it for a minute. You can write it in the comments, or why do you think children misbehave? What are some of the reasons? So what most experts on parenting agree that there some goals, the child, not consciously, but they have, some reason why they're behaving the way they are. And the first one is just attention. And that is actually the most common reason why children misbehave, is to get the parents' attention. And this is why, many of us will experience that when you have a second child, the misbehavior of the children who are already there tends to really escalate. Another common experience is when parents are busy. So for example, if you're having a really busy time at work, so you are spending more time away from them, or if you are having people over at home and you are distracted in that. So those are the times when children tend to escalate their misbehavior, and the main reason is to get attention. The second is to have a feeling of control over their lives. Especially as children grow, this becomes more obvious, and this is related to the fourth point, which is independence, that they want to try out their skills and they want to have some feeling of agency over their lives. And if the child experiences that, most of the time they're being told what to do, and they have no control over their lives, then, that can show up as misbehavior or as rebellion. And some of the times children misbehave just like parents do for self-protection. And self-protection can again look like many different things. And some other reasons why children misbehave are simply because they're tired, they haven't eaten well. There's the new word that has come up recently, which is hangry, right? That you feel angry or irritable when when you're hungry. And for children, it may not even be hunger as much as eating the wrong things. So many things in their environment or in their diet can trigger a feeling of lack of control. Like hyperactivity in children, for example, can really be escalated, not only with the obvious things like sugar, but also, some colors, for example, some food dyes tend to react negatively with some children. But to also understand that the most common reason for misbehavior, and it's estimated that about 80% of all misbehavior is a result of the child wanting the parents' attention. And this, is really important information for us to know, especially in today's age when we talk a lot about children's addiction to technology, and how they can't tear themselves away from it. But if you think about how deprived children are of the parental attention, because a lot of us find it very easy to be distracted. And so even when we may be in the same room, but if we're distracted, then that shows up as a lack of attention for the child, and it is very, they will get our attention in any way they know how. So again, children can meet their goals through positive or negative behavior. So for example, if child is craving attention and contact, they can show it as positive behavior too. It doesn't have to be negative. So for example, it could be they will try to do really well, get gold stars, try their best. That's a positive way to, what looks like positive way to meet the behavior. Or they could misbehave, destroy things, make a noise, hit another child. That's a very, very common way to seek undue attention. How do they want to gain control or power over their own lives? They would want to do everything by themselves. They become independent, and as they grow, that can look like rebellion. So for example, a teenager will show their power in a different way than a toddler, for example, although sometimes it may look very similar. Protection may be that they become very assertive. We've all experienced toddlers who the first word they seem to learn is no, and they use it very often. Or a negative behavior would be, especially as children grow, you see this more, is that they seek revenge from the parents, and it becomes quite an unhealthy relationship. And again, if the child wants independence, they want to try, the positive way would be that they want to try to do things by themselves. But if continuously they are not allowed to, or they don't have too much agency or control over their own lives, it can quite easily look like withdrawal or giving up. They no longer make an effort because they don't think that effort can get them anywhere. So how do parents normally deal with misbehavior? Again, when we're at our best, we may be dealing with it in healthy ways, but sometimes parents can also deal with misbehavior in very ineffective ways. That could be through bribing. That's a very common way, especially in grocery stores. We see this a lot, right? We could threaten them. So sometimes parents try to control the children's behavior by the very, very things that we don't want them to do, right? So a very good example that you can see here is to hit a child that is picking on somebody, another child, right? So this obviously we know is simply just doesn't work. So we bribe them, we make children promise to behave. Sometimes we beg them, especially as they're growing older and we feel a lack of control. We may shout or yell at them. We may shame them or use emotional blackmail. So for example, you don't care about me. I think mothers tend to do the emotional blackmail much better than dads usually. And another way we do deal with is threatening to withhold love, which is not giving the child positive regard, or we all have our ways of withholding love. And again, the idea is that we do these things and they don't work. So what these things do, they're actually especially like threatening to withhold love or emotional blackmail. All of these are forms of punishment rather than discipline, because they are not really teaching the child anything except that unhealthy relationship patterns. So again, the idea is to reflect a little bit about what we do normally. We all have some kind of behavior that we don't like, at home, which we're seeing. And what are some of the ways that we've been dealing with it? And how is that working for us? Because again, the idea is that if it's working, please keep doing more of it, right? Doesn't matter what any expert tells you. If something is working for you in your home, you are the best expert. But again, the idea that most of the time, the ways that we try to deal with misbehavior, ineffective ways such as bribing and getting promises from children, they all may work in the short term, but they all have, I would say, negative side effects. Number one, and number two, they don't work in long term in training the child to manage their behavior for themselves. So now let's talk a little bit about what do we mean by punishment and how is that different from discipline. So punishment is the infliction of unpleasant or painful penalties. It is always, in fact, in retribution for an offense. Like, you don't punish somebody who hasn't done something. And it can be severe, rough, or even disastrous treatment, right? So again, it is always reactive. It is not, we don't think ahead when we are going to punish. Discipline, on the other hand, is defined as a system of teaching and nurturing that prepares children to achieve competence, self-control, self-direction, and caring for others. So it's a completely, first what we really should understand is that there's a different mindset between discipline and punishment. Whereas punishment is always looking back as to what children have done and how not to get them to do it anymore, discipline is something that is teaching children how to do things differently in the future and also how to do things which they may not be doing. So it is much more of a proactive thing. So the goal of punishment, like we said, is the focus is on the past. The goal is usually to stop behavior. We also want obedience. We want peace and quiet, and God help us. We really want that, and sometimes we would give anything for that as parents. And we want some sort of control. Not only over our own lives, but let's face it, many of us do want to be able to control our children as well. The goal of discipline is extremely different. The focus is on the future. We do deal with discipline. You also have to deal with what has happened in the past. It's not like you ignore behavior that's taken place, but the goal is for that behavior not to be corrected rather than just punished punitively. The goal is also to get cooperation from the children, to have them remember what we are teaching them. It is the goal is again to foster self-discipline. So ideally, when my kids were growing up, my aim was always to have to train them in a way that they would behave the same whether I was there or not, right? Ideally, that would be the goal of discipline, because again, when we are dealing with children in a punishing way, we will be signing ourselves up for a lifetime of managing them and policing their behavior, right? With discipline, the idea is that they will be able to manage themselves. So again, the focus is much more long term. It is not only looking at what can I do right now to manage the situation, but also how I can make a difference in the long term. What are some of the parenting strategies with punishment? Coercion, forcing the child to do something. Timeouts are extremely common. Threatening them, spanking, yelling, emotional blackmail, and withholding love. Some of the things we talked about how we deal with ineffective ways of parenting, right? With discipline, again, the parenting strategies are different. First of all, discipline strategies start with modeling appropriate behavior ourselves, and we'll talk a lot more about that. When we parenting to raise children with discipline, we are much more likely to give them reasons and explain why we're doing something. Now, mind you, at some point, inshallah, we will talk about how parents can go quite overboard in giving reasons, and at some point, there has to be a balance. I'm not saying that you should give reasons for everything all the time, because that can get very tiring, for one. And secondly, sometimes you have a gut reaction as a parent, and it's okay to buy yourself time and not to give reasons right there and then. But the idea is that you are parenting based on logic and reasoning, right? Not just out of whims and out of your own emotional state. So strategies for discipline also include logical and natural consequences, teaching the children problem solving and problem solving with them. Also, teaching new behavior itself is a form of discipline, right? With punishment, you're never thinking of teaching new behavior, because you're always looking in the past to how to punish the behavior that's already happened. But with discipline, you are teaching new behavior. You have to take the time to train, for sure. And we have to allow for mistakes and correction, because that is the whole idea of training suggests that children will make mistakes. That's part and parcel of the thing. And part of discipline is learning how, and teaching them and learning for ourselves how to go towards making less mistakes and doing more things right. What is our emotional experience when we are punishing? So most of us, when we are punishing, it's because we are emotionally reactive ourselves. We have a feeling of anger. We normally feel frustrated. We may have a lot of physical stress and anxiety, tension when we do that. We do feel avenged in the moment. For just the slightest moment, we may feel good that that frustration comes out somehow. We also do feel being out of control, because we're not able to, we haven't been able to control the children, and obviously we may feel a lack of sense of control ourselves. And a lot of times when we punish, we go overboard and we feel a lot of guilt after the fact. Now, when we are in the mode of disciplining, it's a different experience for us. We have a concern and love for the child's success and well-being in the long term. Ideally, we remain calm and in charge, and we're able to regulate our own feelings. We're able to manage our own feelings so that we can discipline our children. And we are able to see the big picture and recognize the misbehavior in the context of the parenting relationship. What that means is that when we are in the mode of disciplining as opposed to punishing, when we're punishing, we become very narrow focused, right? We are only able to see what's happening right there and, how that is making us upset. In the context of discipline, we can see that, for example, if a child is learning how to tie their shoelaces, if we're trying to discipline them, we understand that it takes the child several tries to get this right. They're not going to get it right in the first instance. A child who is punished also goes through their own emotional storm. So they have feelings of fear, guilt, stupidity, anger. They might feel inferior, or they might, feel defiant. Both are possible. Long term, most children who are punished regularly, they develop feelings of resentment, general feeling that, life is unfair, and it actually does not promote them taking responsibility for their own actions. Children who are disciplined, on the other hand, even if the discipline is not pleasant, so for example, if they've had to take consequences which are severe for their actions, what research shows is that despite that, long term, they still will have a positive self-image, they have a feeling of confidence, and they have their dignity intact. In other words, their self-worth is not impacted by being disciplined, whereas it is impacted by being punished. What are some of the lessons that a child learns who is punished regularly? That power solves problems, especially if they're yelled at, or if there's physical punishment involved. They definitely believe that if you have power, if you're bigger than somebody, you can use violence, right? And what punishment teaches children most of the time is not to get caught, to get more clever about their misbehavior rather than on not doing the misbehavior. Discipline, on the other hand, shows the child that they can choose their actions. Although they can choose their actions, those actions have consequences. So when a child learns that, they have a much greater feeling of control over their own lives. They realize that, the say, for example, if they have left their lunch at home, and as a result of which they go hungry, they realize that, I forgot it, and I'm bearing the consequences of that, right? And they also learn how to correct the mistakes. So in this example, a child is much more likely to, after forgetting their lunch a few times, they're much more likely to remember to find ways to remember their lunch if if they're allowed to face the consequences of those actions, right? So the outcome of punishment is that children become more dependent. They're not able to, especially along moral and ethical issues, children who are regularly punished do not show good decision-making skills, for example. They may become either revengeful or withdrawn, and they show that they're less skillful at solving problems. And of course, we know that punishment does not foster a healthy relationship with parents, especially as children grow. It's much more likely to get more conflicted over time. And on the other hand, children who are disciplined, they do become more independent. They tend to get along better with others. They're able to solve problems, make decisions better. And, perhaps a very important point is that as they grow, they're able to maintain a healthy relationship and mutual respect with parents. Because obviously, if we've respected them as children and not attacked their dignity, for example, through punishment or whatever, it's much more likely that when they grow up, they're going to do the same, or they're going to have that kind of relationship with us. So discipline with authority means to give life learning. And our goal as parents is to give life to our children's learning, to instruct, to teach, to help them develop self-discipline, which is an ordering of the self from the inside, not imposition from the outside, right? So that's a really good point, that the goal of discipline should be that the children should be able to manage without us, in the long term. Now, what are some of the other problems with punishment? So a study on the moral development of children found that children who feared punishment tended to have less guilt. And, the way we can understand that is that if there is somebody else policing their behavior, they obviously have less motivation to do things differently, because they know that there's somebody policing them from the outside, right? What this study found was that they were less resistant to temptation, and they had fewer internal controls than children who were not punished. And this is really good information for us, because I'm assuming that most of us as parents want our children to have good values. We want our children to be good human beings above everything else. And when we use punishment, it is actually going against that goal. So punishment also interferes with the development of internal controls by teaching children that it is somebody else's responsibility to control them and decide what behavior is bad. So this is exactly what we were talking about, right? That they have no motivation to take over their own, managing their own behavior, because somebody else is doing it from the outside. And so children conclude that it's okay to misbehave as long as they don't get caught. Also, this is a very important point that if punishment is the go to discipline strategy, it can really easily spiral out of control. So, for example, if we use violence, anger, spanking children, it can, what can happen is that the more we discipline them, their behavior becomes worse, and then we need to keep escalating our punishment strategies. And again, this can really easily, when there is violence in the home, it's always a very volatile situation because you don't know what people are capable of doing when they're not in control, right? And we know it's very easy, especially in the West, to land up with involvement with child protection. And I will say this, that involvement with child protection is not the end of the world, especially if you're not able to manage parenting and we need help. Many times that's the way to get help. Unfortunately, a lot of times parents will not seek help even if they're finding it difficult to parent voluntarily, with a counselor or parenting classes or whatever. And when things go out of control and sometimes child protection gets involved in their lives, the first stage is not to take away their child, which is, a big misconception that many people have about child protection. The first line of intervention that they do is to get the parents help. So again, if we are in a cycle of punishment and reaction and all of that, and we're finding it difficult to manage ourselves, it's a really good idea to get help for ourselves before it goes out of control. Also, more problems with punishment is that it only communicates what the child should not do. It does not really teach them what to do instead. And it only provides short-term suppression of inappropriate behavior. So the idea is that punishment does work. The reason why a lot of us use it is because in the short term, if say we punish a child who is misbehaving, bad talking, by taking away their phone, that seems to be the go-to parenting strategy for a lot of us these days, right? Take away social media or take away Wi-Fi. And because that thing means so much to the child, in the short term, they will do whatever they can to get that back. So punishment in the short term will work. The idea is it doesn't work in the long term, and it doesn't really change or shape behavior. And it sets the stage for escape and avoidance. So for example, if a child has a problem with using bad language, for example, right? And if we discipline them by taking away the phone, what they're likely to do is not swear in front of us, but it's not going to change their behavior. It's not going to teach them why it's not a good idea to use bad language or what to do instead. So the idea is that punishing doesn't really solve real problems. And so this is what I was mentioning, that the cycle of punishment is that the child misbehaves, the parent punishes, the child obviously reacts negatively. No child is thrilled to be punished usually. And the parent punishes again, and so the cycle continues. So why do we use punishment when it is not effective? That's the million-dollar question. So just reflect for a moment. Think about the time when you used punishment as a form of controlling your child's behavior, and what was going on for you. So a lot of times what we find is that when parents go to punishment rather than discipline, it's because they stress themselves. They have too many things going on. They are not calm themselves. They might be hungry, lonely, tired, angry, something else going on. They have we have emotional baggage that we carry on. We don't know how to do differently. There's many reasons why we could use punishment, even when we know that it's not effective, right? And the idea here is not to make ourselves feel awful about it or to judge ourselves negatively, because again, that doesn't help. We as parents have a lot going on. Parenting in this day and age, in the 21st century, is not for the faint-hearted. And we need to give ourselves a lot of compassion and credit for what things that we are already doing right. Okay? And the idea that just like children, we too are learning as we're going along. And, the more we practice things that work, inshallah, the better we will do. So again, the idea is not to make ourselves, because especially I think mothers tend to be really good at not at giving ourselves a hard time. So this is really not about giving ourselves a hard time. It is about learning to do things a little bit differently. So how do we set limits with love? How do we, how do we discipline? And I really believe that disciplining children begins with practicing discipline ourselves. We cannot be in charge if we are not in control of our own words and actions. So if we are finding it hard to manage, and if we find ourselves reactive frequently, saying things or doing things that we later regret, it's a really good idea to begin with some self-care and to take care of ourselves, to do what we need to manage our own emotional state, so that we don't end up taking it out on the children. So what are the 5 basics of discipline? And the acronym for this, to help us remember, is called RAISE. That's RAISE. So the first one is rules. We need to make sure that children know and understand expectations and the rules for behavior. So really, we cannot have consequences or discipline children until we set some ground rules. And one of the issues is that a lot of times we are trying to parent on the fly. Right? Something happens, say a child back answers, and we get upset and we give them a consequence right there and then, right? But honestly, that's probably not the most effective way to do it. The idea is that unless and until we set some time to make ground rules for what we expect children to behave and how we expect ourselves to behave, it's very difficult to give them consequences. And the way to set rules is obviously not in the moment, right? It's not when things are going wrong that you set rules. It is when everyone is calm, when the triggering event is not in the middle of the event, right? And we'll talk about family meetings, and there is a couple of blogs on my website as well, on family meetings, on how to have family meetings and all of that. So, that might be useful to just review those things, because family meetings are a wonderful time and place to actually set ground rules, not only for the children, but for the whole family as a whole. The A in RAISE is for appropriate behavior. So we need to have strategies for encouraging appropriate behavior as well as discouraging inappropriate behavior, or what we call punishing, right? So what are some of the ways that we can encourage children to behave the way we want to? One of the most effective is to give them positive attention. That means to give them attention when they're doing things right, as opposed to only giving them attention when they are misbehaving. And again, it's very easy to do that, to give them attention only when they're misbehaving, and it leads to more misbehavior, right? So positive attention, and it's very related to descriptive praise, which again, there is some writing on that on the website, and inshallah we will talk more about that in other places. But descriptive praise simply means to actually look at behavior that you want to encourage and to describe it to the child. So it's a little bit different than praising what we think of, or especially junk praise, which is, you're the most wonderful child ever. That would be an example of junk praise. Means it doesn't really give the child any information. Descriptive praise would be something very specific. I liked how you put your plate in the sink after you finished your snack. Or thank you for washing your glass. Again, the more we focus on behavior that we like, the more we are going to get off it. And, the more of that behavior we are likely to get. It really works. Inappropriate behavior. So again, we also need, as parents, strategies for dealing with behavior that is not appropriate. And again, there are many ways to do this. A simple way to do it is to ignore some of it. And sometimes we think, how is that going to work? Because isn't it going to amplify it? And again, we need to understand this in the context of everything else we talk about. So if the child is getting positive attention when they're doing things right, and you are not giving them that attention when they are being silly or things that you don't like, honestly, that behavior is much more likely to decrease by itself. And obviously, very common strategies for dealing with misbehavior are establishing natural and logical consequences, right? The S in raise is setting. Setting means that we need to provide the right environment where children find it easy to be disciplined. And a good example of this is, for example, if we want them to do their homework at a certain time, if the kitchen table where they work possibly is already cleaned with with everything set up, and there's nothing else going on in the environment, that will make it easy for them to sit down, focus, and do what they need to do, right? If the setting in the house is that as soon as Salah time happens, for example, everyone goes and prays before they eat, for example, again, that is setting the environment in the home so that it makes it easy for them to do the right thing. And although the E comes at the end, this is possibly the most important thing that we can do as parents, which is modeling the behavior we want to see in our children and teaching by example. This is, the most powerful parenting technique ever. So let's just talk a little bit about consequences. Natural consequences happen, as naturally as a result of the behavior, and we actually don't need to do anything except to step aside and to wait it out, and we can reflect on the consequences later. This is possibly the hardest thing for parents to do. Why? Because we don't want to see our children suffer, except when we make them suffer, right? We don't like it. So, for example, the example that I gave before, the child leaves the lunch at home. A very easy way to teach them actually to remember their lunch would be to let them go hungry a couple of days. But many parents will rush to the school and keep taking the lunch. And if they do that, obviously the child has no motivation to remember to take their lunch with them. Another natural consequence would be if they're wearing their shoes on the wrong feet, their feet are going to hurt. And eventually they will figure that out and learn to self-correct. Logical consequences are something that does not follow naturally. So, for example, a logical consequence would be, if a child is continuously throwing tantrums at the grocery store, for example, and asking for things that they know they're not, that we don't bring into our house, for example, junk food or whatever. A logical consequence would be that that child does not accompany the parent to the grocery store. That is logical. Why? Because it's related. An illogical consequence, or something that makes that doesn't gel, for example, is to take away their phone for everything, right? That's neither natural nor logical, but the reason we do it all the time is because it's just easy, and we know it creates a lot of it upsets the kids, and they will do whatever they can to get it back. So what are some of the clues to the fact that consequences are reasonable? First of all, is it related? The fact that the child is not accompanying you to the grocery store is related. It seems to be reasonable, and it's respectful. You're not telling them off. You're not doing anything. You're simply telling them that because they throw a tantrum, they cannot go with you. It's, again, is it simple to implement? We need to make, as parents, we need to make our lives as easy as possible. We don't need to make it harder. So it has to be something that, we are not going to have to monitor over a long period of time. So if you tell the child, you can't have your laptop for the next 6 months and we know that they're going to need it for school, it's probably not very practical or simple to implement. And is it valuable as a learning tool? A child that is left behind because they behaved a certain way would may possibly be a good learning for them, that if they want to accompany you to the grocery stores, they need to learn to manage themselves while they're there. An example of a reasonable consequence would be if a child borrows a toy and returns it broken, for example, they work to, through their pocket money or whatever, to replace it with the new one and give it to whoever they borrowed it from. Is this difficult for the child? Possibly. It could be quite difficult, and it's a really good learning experience. It's respectful, it's practical, it's reasonable. Again, the idea is that consequences can be quite strong as long as they follow these and as long as they're respectful and they're not attacking the child as a person, they're just being used as a learning tool. So this is what I was talking about. As parents, we need to resist the temptation to discipline on the fly. It's perfectly okay to take a time out for ourselves and reflect on the appropriate consequences for inappropriate behavior. If we catch our children doing something which is really troubling or upsetting to us, it's very easy to go, you're not leaving this house for the next 6 months or till you're 18 or 21 or whatever, right? We've all said that, and we've lived to regret it because we know it's not practical and reasonable, right? So the idea that it's when we're upset, it's really a good idea to take a time out for ourselves. We're always giving it to our children, but it's, possibly more helpful to take it ourselves and say that we need to think about and reflect on how we're going to deal with this. You don't have to deal with something in the moment. So what does the language of discipline look like? When we say things like, I believe in you, I trust you, you can handle this, you're cared for, you are a good person, we all make mistakes, you can do better, and let's practice. These are some of the things that give the children the message that they are being trained, that although we love them and believe them, we are going to hold them accountable, right? That we make mistakes and we learn to correct them. We don't just make mistakes and let it be. So I think let's leave the practice for now. What I have done is the slides will be there for you. I'm putting the URL to download the slides, so you can certainly look at the slides. You can practice with the scenarios that have been given, and if it is helpful, please get in touch with me, send a note on Facebook, and inshallah we can have another session, maybe a question and answer session or just a session about practicing the rules of discipline. Okay, so we won't go through them right now, but just think about what are some of the takeaway messages from this session, and very importantly, what will you do differently from today? It's actually a really good idea whenever you're learning something to pause for a minute at the end and actually to make a commitment. And the way you make a commitment, if you feel like putting it in the comments, that would be wonderful, because again, we learn from each other, and what we do can inspire other parents and help other parents as well. But again, when we write it down and we make a commitment, especially a public commitment, it can really help shape our behavior and help us practice things differently. So please keep in touch. I'm easy to find. Here are the 2 website addresses, and there is a podcast. I'm trying to be better, inshallah, about uploading content on that. I've been focusing on another podcast, and that's why this one has been a bit neglected, but I'm focusing on this right now. So inshallah there will be things continuously updated. If you could actually visit iTunes, and if you find it useful, if you could write a review, that would be wonderful. We would really appreciate that. And lastly, just started a closed Facebook group called Positive Parenting Community. And the vision is that, inshallah, I'm going to be moving a lot of the parenting stuff onto this group, including possibly the Facebook sessions and all of that. So if you're interested in that, please do send a request to join, and I will make sure that that you are added as soon as possible. So that was the session for today. Inshallah, would love to get your feedback, and we'll see you next time.